Marcus Chun had always dreamed of visiting London. The 28-year-old software engineer from San Francisco had saved for 3 years to make this trip happen. He wanted everything to be perfect: the hotels, the restaurants, the sightseeing tours. But, most importantly, he wanted to see Buckingham Palace and witness the famous changing of the guard ceremony that he had watched countless times on YouTube videos. The morning of July 15th started like any other tourist day in London. Marcus woke up early in his modest hotel room near Russell Square. He had planned every minute of his itinerary with military precision. First stop would be the Tower of London, then a quick lunch near Westminster Bridge, followed by the main event at Buckingham Palace. He had even checked the weather forecast multiple times: partly cloudy with no chance of rain. Perfect conditions for photography. Marcus grabbed his camera bag, stuffed with 2 expensive DSLR cameras, multiple lenses, and enough memory cards to document every moment of his dream vacation. He had been planning this trip since his college graduation, and now finally, at 28, he had enough savings and vacation time to make it happen properly. The morning went smoothly. The Tower of London exceeded his expectations. The crown jewels were more spectacular than any photograph could capture. He spent nearly 3 hours there, taking hundreds of photos and listening to every word the yeoman warders shared during their tours. The history fascinated him: stories of executions, imprisonments, and royal ceremonies that had taken place within those ancient walls for over 900 years. For lunch, Marcus chose a small cafe near Big Ben. He ordered fish and chips with a cup of English breakfast tea, wanting to experience authentic British cuisine. The elderly woman serving him noticed his American accent and struck up a conversation about his visit. She recommended several spots around Buckingham Palace where tourists could get the best views of the guards. "The guards are real soldiers, you know," she mentioned while refilling his teacup. "Not just for show like some people think. They've served in Afghanistan, Iraq, all over the world. Very serious about their duties, they are. Been protecting the royal family for centuries." Marcus listened with genuine interest. He had read about the guards online, but hearing it from a local made it feel more real. These weren't actors in costume. They were actual military personnel with real responsibilities and years of training behind them. After lunch, Marcus made his way toward Buckingham Palace. The streets grew more crowded as he approached the royal residence. Tourists from every corner of the world gathered along the black iron railings, cameras ready, chattering in dozens of different languages. Street performers entertained the crowds while vendors sold souvenirs and snacks. Marcus found a good spot along the fence about an hour before the ceremony was scheduled to begin. He wanted to secure the perfect position for photographs. The anticipation in the air was electric. Children pressed their faces against the railings while parents lifted them up for better views. Tour guides led groups of elderly visitors, explaining the significance of what they were about to witness. As Marcus set up his cameras and adjusted his settings for the lighting conditions, he couldn't help but feel a sense of childlike excitement. This was a moment he had imagined for years. Every documentary he had watched about the British royal family, every history book he had read about the monarchy, had led to this moment. The famous red-uniformed guards began to appear, marching in perfect formation. Their black bearskin hats stood tall and imposing. Their movements were precise, almost robotic, yet graceful. Marcus began snapping photos immediately, the rapid clicking of his camera shutter joining the symphony of hundreds of other cameras around him. One guard in particular caught Marcus's attention. The young man looked to be around his own age, possibly younger. His posture was impeccable, his expression serious and focused. He stood perfectly still at his post near the palace gates, rifle at his side, eyes looking straight ahead. Marcus zoomed in with his telephoto lens, capturing the intricate details of the guard's uniform, the shine of his boots, the determined expression on his face. The guard's name was Thomas Richardson, though Marcus didn't know this at the time. Thomas was 26 years old and had been serving in the Coldstream Guards for 4 years. He had completed 2 tours of duty in Afghanistan before being assigned to ceremonial duties at Buckingham Palace. For Thomas, this posting was both an honor and a responsibility he took seriously. Thomas had grown up in a military family in Yorkshire. His father had served in the same regiment 30 years earlier. His grandfather had been a guard during World War II. Standing at that post represented not just his own service, but generations of family tradition and dedication to the crown. Marcus continued photographing, completely absorbed in documenting every detail of the ceremony. He moved along the fence, trying different angles, adjusting his camera settings to capture the perfect shots. Other tourists began to notice his professional-looking equipment and started asking him questions about photography. A family from Germany asked if he could take their photo with the guards in the background. An elderly couple from Japan wanted to know what kind of camera he was using. Marcus was happy to help, feeling like something of an unofficial photography guide for his fellow tourists. As the ceremony progressed, Marcus decided he wanted to get some close-up shots of individual guards. He had read online that the guards were trained to remain completely motionless during their duties, no matter what distractions occurred around them. This fascinated him from a psychological perspective. How did they maintain such focus and discipline? Marcus approached the section of fence closest to where Thomas Richardson was standing guard. The young guard's expression was completely neutral, his eyes focused on a point somewhere in the distance. Marcus raised his camera and began taking photos, impressed by the guard's unwavering concentration. Other tourists gathered around Marcus, also drawn to photograph the stoic guard. Someone made a comment about trying to make the guard smile or react. Marcus ignored this, preferring to capture the authentic dignity and professionalism of the moment. A small crowd had formed around this particular section of fence. Children were waving at the guard, trying to get his attention. Teenagers were making faces and silly gestures, hoping for some kind of reaction. Thomas remained completely unmoved, maintaining his professional composure exactly as his training had taught him. Marcus finished his photography session and decided to take a break. He had been standing and walking for hours, and his feet were beginning to ache. He spotted a nearby vendor selling hot beverages and decided to treat himself to another cup of English tea before continuing his sightseeing. The vendor, a cheerful man in his 50s named Harold, had been working the Buckingham Palace tourist route for over 15 years. He knew all about the guards, the ceremonies, and the thousands of tourists who passed by his cart every month. First time seeing the guards? Harold asked as he prepared Marcus's tea. Yes, it's incredible, Marcus replied, still somewhat in awe of what he had witnessed. They're so disciplined. How do they stay so focused with all these people trying to distract them? Harold chuckled. Years of training, mate. These boys are real soldiers, not just pretty uniforms. They've seen combat, most of them. Standing still for a few hours is probably relaxing compared to what they've been through. Marcus accepted his tea, which was served in a disposable cup that was almost too hot to hold comfortably. The steam rose from the dark liquid, creating small clouds in the cool London air. He blew on the surface of the tea, trying to cool it down enough to drink. The guard you were photographing, Harold continued. I've seen him here for about 6 months now. Always professional, that one. Never breaks character, no matter what happens. Marcus looked back toward where Thomas was still standing at his post. Even from a distance, the guard's posture remained perfect, his focus unbroken despite the continuing crowds of tourists. Has anyone ever tried to really distract them? Marcus asked, curious about how far some tourists might go. Harold's expression grew more serious. Oh, you'd be surprised what some people try. Shouting, singing, making loud noises. Most tourists are respectful, but there's always a few who think it's funny to try to break their concentration. The guards are trained to handle it all. Marcus nodded, sipping his tea carefully. It was still very hot, but the flavor was rich and comforting. He found himself developing a real appreciation for British tea culture during his visit. What happens if someone really crosses the line? Marcus asked. Well, that's where it gets serious, Harold explained while serving another customer. The guards are real soldiers with real authority. They're not just for show. If someone poses an actual threat or becomes too disruptive, things can escalate quickly. Marcus finished his tea and thanked Harold for the conversation. He decided to walk around the palace perimeter one more time before heading to his next planned destination. The crowds were beginning to thin out as the official ceremony concluded, but many tourists lingered, hoping for additional photo opportunities. As Marcus walked along the fence, he reflected on everything he had seen and learned. This trip was turning out to be even better than he had imagined. Every interaction, every sight, every experience was adding layers to his understanding and appreciation of British culture and history. He passed by Thomas's post one more time. The guard remained in position, though Marcus noticed that his shift would probably be ending soon based on what he had read about guard rotations. Other guards were beginning to move, and there seemed to be subtle preparations for some kind of changing of positions. Marcus decided this would be a good time to head to his next destination. He had planned to visit Westminster Abbey before it closed for the day. As he walked away from Buckingham Palace, he felt a sense of satisfaction and accomplishment. He had successfully completed one of the major goals of his London vacation. The afternoon was still young, and Marcus had energy for several more hours of sightseeing. He looked forward to exploring more of London's historic sites and perhaps finding another authentic British pub for dinner. Tomorrow, he planned to visit the British Museum and take a day trip to Windsor Castle. As Marcus disappeared into the crowd of tourists heading toward Westminster, he had no idea that his path would cross with Thomas Richardson again in just 2 days. He had no way of knowing that a simple misunderstanding and a moment of poor judgment would transform his dream vacation into an international incident that would change both of their lives forever. The sun was beginning to set over London, casting long shadows across the palace grounds. Thomas Richardson maintained his post for another hour before being relieved by the next guard. As he marched away in formation with his fellow guards, he looked forward to a quiet evening off duty. Neither Marcus nor Thomas could have predicted that their brief, anonymous encounter today was just the prelude to a much more dramatic and consequential meeting that would soon make headlines around the world and test everything both young men believed about duty, consequences, and redemption. 2 days later, Marcus woke up feeling somewhat frustrated with his London experience. Yesterday's visit to Westminster Abbey had been disappointing due to unexpected maintenance work that blocked access to several key areas he had wanted to photograph. His planned day trip to Windsor Castle had been cancelled when he discovered that his pre-purchased tickets were for the wrong date due to a booking website error. Marcus had spent most of the previous evening on the phone with customer service representatives, trying to resolve the booking confusion. The stress of dealing with the mix-up, combined with the time zone difference affecting his sleep schedule, had left him feeling irritable and behind schedule on his carefully planned itinerary. He decided to return to Buckingham Palace, hoping to capture some different shots and maybe catch details he had missed during his first visit. Perhaps he could photograph the guards during a different time of day, with different lighting conditions. Professional travel photographers always emphasize the importance of shooting the same subjects at various times to create a comprehensive portfolio. Marcus packed his camera gear and headed out into another overcast London morning. The weather forecast predicted occasional light showers, so he brought a compact umbrella and protective covers for his cameras. He stopped at the same cafe where he had eaten lunch 2 days earlier, ordering another cup of English breakfast tea and a simple breakfast sandwich. The elderly woman working there remembered him from his previous visit. "Back for more photos of the palace?" she asked cheerfully while preparing his order. "Yes, hoping for better shots today," Marcus replied, though his tone lacked the enthusiasm he had felt during his first visit. "Yesterday didn't go quite as planned." "Oh, that happens to all tourists, dear," she said sympathetically. "London can be tricky that way. But the guards will still be there, doing their duty same as always. Very reliable, they are." Marcus thanked her and made his way back toward Buckingham Palace. The crowds were smaller today, which he hoped would give him better opportunities for unobstructed photography. Many tour groups seemed to visit on specific schedules, so timing could make a significant difference in the tourist density around popular attractions. When Marcus arrived at the palace, he noticed the same guard from 2 days earlier was again at his post near the main gates. Thomas Richardson was back on duty, standing with the same perfect posture and unwavering focus that had impressed Marcus during his first visit. Thomas had no memory of the specific tourist who had photographed him extensively 2 days earlier. Hundreds of people took his picture every week, and he had been trained to tune out individual faces in the crowd while remaining alert to his surroundings for security purposes. Marcus set up his equipment in a different location this time, hoping to capture the guards from new angles. He had studied his photos from the previous visit and identified several composition improvements he wanted to make. The lighting was different today due to the overcast sky, which would give his photos a more dramatic, moody atmosphere. As Marcus began shooting, he noticed that the crowd dynamics were different from his first visit. There were fewer families with small children today, but more teenagers and young adults who seemed less interested in the historical significance of the ceremony and more focused on getting social media content. A group of college-age tourists near Marcus were being particularly disruptive, laughing loudly and making comments about the guard's appearance. They seemed to be treating the whole experience as entertainment rather than observing a serious military tradition. "Look at that one," one of the young men said, pointing at Thomas. "He looks like a robot. I bet we could make him move if we tried hard enough." Marcus found their attitude disrespectful, but tried to focus on his own photography. He had positioned himself to capture the contrast between the guard's serious professionalism and the casual tourist atmosphere surrounding him. The disruptive group gradually moved closer to the fence near Thomas's position. They began making increasingly loud comments and gestures, trying to provoke some kind of reaction from the guard. Other tourists in the area started to look uncomfortable with their behavior. "Hey, soldier boy," one of them called out. "Smile for the camera." Thomas maintained his composure perfectly, giving no indication that he heard or cared about their attempts to distract him. His training had prepared him for exactly this kind of situation. He understood that some tourists would try to test his discipline, and he was determined not to give them the satisfaction of any reaction. Marcus continued photographing, but found himself becoming annoyed with the group's behavior. Their loud voices were disrupting the atmosphere he was trying to capture, and their disrespectful attitude toward the guard bothered him more than he had expected. The group's behavior escalated when one of them started making exaggerated military salutes and marching movements, mocking the guard's ceremonial duties. Other tourists began to move away from the area, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Marcus decided to relocate to a different section of the fence, hoping to find a quieter spot where he could concentrate on his photography without the distraction. As he gathered his equipment, he heard one of the disruptive tourists make a comment about making the toy soldier dance. The comment triggered something in Marcus that he couldn't quite explain. Perhaps it was his frustration with yesterday's disappointments, or his general stress about the vacation not going according to plan, or simply his growing respect for the guard's professionalism in the face of such rudeness. Marcus found a new position about 50 feet away from the disruptive group. From this angle, he could capture Thomas in profile with the palace architecture in the background. The lighting was actually better here, and he was able to take several shots that he thought might be the best of his entire trip. As Marcus worked, he noticed that the disruptive group had moved on to bothering other guards, leaving Thomas alone at his post. The young guard continued his duty with the same unwavering focus, apparently unaffected by the earlier harassment. Marcus spent another hour photographing various guards and architectural details around the palace. His technical skills were improving with each shot, and he was beginning to feel more confident about the professional quality of his travel portfolio. Around noon, Marcus decided to take another break. His morning tea had long worn off, and he was feeling slightly dehydrated from several hours of concentration and physical activity. He had noticed that the same beverage vendor from 2 days earlier was working his usual spot near the palace gates. Harold recognized Marcus immediately. "Back for more photos, I see," he said with a friendly smile. "How did they turn out from the other day?" "Really well, actually," Marcus replied, feeling genuinely pleased as he reviewed some of his images on his camera's LCD screen. "I think I got some shots that could actually be worth printing and framing." "Excellent. Same tea as before." Marcus nodded, and Harold began preparing another cup of English breakfast tea. The routine felt comfortable and familiar, like a small piece of home in a foreign place. "That guard you were photographing is back on duty today," Harold mentioned as he handed Marcus the steaming cup. "Thomas Richardson. Good lad, that one. Very dedicated to his job." Marcus was surprised that Harold knew the guard's name. "You know him personally?" "Oh, I get to know most of the regular guards over time. Been working this spot for 15 years. Thomas has been here about 6 months now. Always professional, never complains about the tourists, even the difficult ones." Marcus accepted the tea, which was again almost too hot to hold comfortably. The cup warmed his hands, which had gotten cold during his morning photography session in the damp London air. "Has he had military service beyond this?" Marcus asked, genuinely curious about the man he had been photographing. "Afghanistan, I believe. 2 tours. Like most of these boys, he's seen real action before coming here. Makes all the tourist nonsense seem pretty trivial, I imagine." Marcus sipped his tea carefully, processing this information. It added another layer of respect for the guard's professionalism. This wasn't just pageantry. This was a combat veteran continuing his service in a different capacity. "I saw some tourists giving him trouble earlier," Marcus mentioned. "He handled it perfectly." Harold nodded knowingly. "Happens all the time. Most people are respectful, but there's always a few who think military discipline is some kind of game. Thomas and the others are trained to handle it, but it can't be pleasant." Marcus finished his tea while chatting with Harold about London tourism and the challenges of working around such a famous landmark. Harold shared stories about celebrity visitors, unusual weather events, and the occasional dramatic incidents that occurred around the palace. "Ever see anything really serious happen?" Marcus asked. "Once in a while someone gets too aggressive or tries to climb the fence. That's when you see how quickly these ceremonial guards can switch to real security mode. They're not just for show, these lads." Marcus thanked Harold for the tea and conversation, then decided to do one final photography session before heading to his next planned destination. He wanted to capture the guards during the early afternoon light, which had a different quality than the morning shots. Marcus returned to his earlier position near Thomas's post. The disruptive group from earlier had left, and the atmosphere around this section of the fence was much more peaceful. A few families with children were taking photos, and an elderly tour group was listening to their guide explain the history of the Guards' regiments. Marcus began his final shooting session, focusing on details he had missed earlier. He photographed the intricate brass buttons on Thomas's uniform, the texture of his bearskin hat, and the perfectly polished leather of his boots. Every element of the Guard's appearance reflected the precision and tradition of his regiment. As Marcus worked, he found himself developing a genuine admiration for Thomas's dedication. Standing motionless for hours in all weather conditions, maintaining perfect posture and focus while hundreds of strangers stared and took pictures, required a level of mental discipline that Marcus wasn't sure he could match. The afternoon crowd was growing larger as more tour groups arrived for scheduled palace visits. Marcus noticed that Thomas's shift would probably end soon, based on the guard rotation patterns he had observed during his previous visit. Marcus decided to take a few more shots before packing up his equipment. He wanted to capture one perfect image that summarized everything he found impressive about the Royal Guards, their history, their discipline, their service, and their dignity. As Marcus raised his camera for what he planned to be his final shot of Thomas Richardson, he had no idea that their next encounter would be completely different. In less than an hour, a simple accident and a moment of panic would transform both their lives in ways neither could imagine. The afternoon sun broke through the clouds for a few minutes, creating perfect lighting conditions for photography. Marcus smiled as he captured what he thought might be the best shot of his entire London vacation. He felt satisfied with his work and ready to move on to explore more of the city. Thomas continued his duty, unaware that the tourist photographer had been documenting his service with such care and respect. His shift would end in 45 minutes, and he looked forward to a quiet evening with fellow guards at their barracks. Neither young man realized they were about to become central figures in an international incident that would test everything they thought they knew about justice, consequences, and human nature. The incident happened so quickly that most witnesses later disagreed about the exact sequence of events. Marcus had packed up his camera equipment and was walking back toward Harold's beverage cart for one final cup of tea before leaving the palace area. He had decided to treat himself to a proper afternoon tea experience at a nearby hotel, wanting to end his Buckingham Palace visits on a perfect note. Harold greeted him warmly for the third time that week. "One more for the road?" he asked, already reaching for a cup. "Actually, could I get it to go this time?" Marcus asked. "I want to walk around the area a bit more before heading to my next stop." Harold prepared the tea in a sturdy takeaway cup with a secure lid. "Careful now, it's quite hot," he warned as he handed it to Marcus. "These cups can get a bit slippery when they warm up." Marcus accepted the cup, immediately noticing how hot it felt through the thin cardboard. He wrapped both hands around it carefully and began walking back toward the palace fence for one last look at the guards before leaving. The crowd had thickened considerably in the past hour. Several large tour groups had arrived simultaneously, creating bottlenecks along the popular viewing areas. Marcus found himself moving slowly through dense clusters of tourists, all trying to position themselves for photos while navigating the limited space along the fence. As Marcus approached the section where Thomas Richardson was still standing guard, he noticed a commotion developing near the fence. A large tour group of elderly visitors was trying to organize a group photo, while a family with several small children was attempting to navigate through the crowd with a stroller. The elderly tour group's guide was speaking loudly in German, trying to coordinate positioning for their photo. Several group members were having difficulty hearing instructions due to ambient noise from other tourists. Meanwhile, the family with the stroller was becoming increasingly frustrated as they tried to find a path through the crowded area. Marcus found himself caught in the middle of this human traffic jam. The elderly tourists were moving slowly and unpredictably, stopping suddenly to take individual photos or adjust their positions. The family with the stroller was trying to push through gaps that were too narrow, causing additional congestion. Thomas Richardson remained at his post throughout this chaos, maintaining his professional composure despite the unusual crowd density around his position. He had been trained to stay focused on his duties regardless of civilian activity, but the situation was requiring extra concentration to maintain his mental discipline. Marcus tried to navigate through the crowd while protecting his expensive camera equipment and keeping his hot tea from spilling. The takeaway cup was becoming increasingly difficult to hold as the heat transferred through the thin cardboard. He considered throwing the tea away, but he had paid for it, and genuinely wanted to drink it once he found a quieter spot. The crowd situation deteriorated when one of the elderly tourists tripped slightly while backing up for the group photo. She wasn't injured, but the incident caused several people around her to react quickly, creating a ripple effect of sudden movement through the densely packed area. Marcus was jostled from his left side by someone trying to help the elderly woman. At the same time, the family with the stroller was pushing past him on his right, trying to escape the congested area. For a moment, Marcus found himself being squeezed from both directions with nowhere to move. The pressure on his arms caused Marcus to lose his grip on the hot tea cup. He tried to catch it, but his hands were full with camera equipment, and the cup was too hot to grab securely. The cup tumbled through the air, its lid popping off, sending the scalding contents in an arc toward the fence. Thomas Richardson saw the liquid coming toward him, but couldn't break his position to avoid it. His training required him to maintain his post regardless of what happened around him, unless he faced an actual security threat. A spilled beverage didn't qualify as such a threat, even though it was clearly going to hit him. The hot tea struck Thomas across his chest and left arm, soaking through his wool uniform. The temperature was high enough to be painful, but not severe enough to cause serious burns. More shocking than the physical sensation was the complete unexpectedness of the incident. For a fraction of a second, Thomas's composure wavered. His eyes widened slightly, and his jaw tensed as he processed what had just happened. Then, his training reasserted itself, and his expression returned to its professional neutrality. Marcus was horrified by what he had done. His first instinct was to apologize and offer help, but the fence separated him from the guard, and other tourists were still pressing around him. He called out, "I'm so sorry," but wasn't sure if Thomas could hear him over the general crowd noise. The witnesses around Marcus had varying reactions to what they had observed. Some assumed it had been an accident and felt sympathetic toward both the tourist and the guard. Others believed they had witnessed an intentional attack on the guard and were shocked by what they perceived as outrageous behavior. An elderly British man standing near Marcus spoke up loudly. "That was completely unacceptable. You can't treat our guards that way." Marcus tried to explain that it had been an accident, but the man wasn't interested in listening. Other tourists began taking notice of the situation, and Marcus found himself the center of unwanted attention. "It was an accident," Marcus said to anyone who would listen. "I was pushed and dropped my cup. I didn't mean for this to happen." Some witnesses supported Marcus's explanation, having seen the crowd dynamics that led to the spill. Others remained skeptical, wondering how someone could be so careless around such an important ceremonial site. Thomas Richardson continued his duty despite the tea staining his uniform and the lingering discomfort from the hot liquid. Protocol required him to remain at his post until properly relieved, regardless of what had occurred. He gave no sign of acknowledging the incident or the growing discussion among tourists about what had happened. A security officer who had been monitoring the area from a distance approached to assess the situation. Palace security was trained to distinguish between accidents and intentional incidents, and the officer needed to determine which category this event fell into. The security officer, Sergeant Williams, had been working palace security for 12 years. He had seen every imaginable type of tourist behavior, from genuine accidents to deliberate provocations. His job was to maintain order while allowing tourists to enjoy their visit to one of Britain's most important landmarks. Sergeant Williams approached Marcus calmly. "Sir, I need to speak with you about what just happened." Marcus felt a surge of panic. He had never been involved in any kind of security incident, and he wasn't sure what the consequences might be. "It was completely accidental," he said immediately. "I was pushed in the crowd and lost my grip on the cup." "I understand, sir. I just need to get your account of what happened and some basic information." Several witnesses volunteered their observations to Sergeant Williams. The accounts varied significantly, with some people describing an obvious accident and others expressing suspicion about Marcus's intentions. "He was definitely pushed," said a middle-aged woman from Canada. "I saw the whole thing. The crowd was packed too tight, and people were moving in all directions." "I don't know," said another witness, a young man from Australia. "He was standing pretty close to the fence. Could have been more careful with his drink." Sergeant Williams listened to all the accounts while observing Marcus's behavior and demeanor. The American tourist appeared genuinely distressed about the incident, which was consistent with it being accidental. However, protocol required a full investigation regardless of initial impressions. "Sir, I'm going to need you to come with me to provide a formal statement about this incident," Sergeant Williams told Marcus. Marcus felt his vacation nightmare getting worse. Am I under arrest? Not at this time, sir. But this is an official matter involving one of Her Majesty's guards, so we need to document everything properly. Marcus looked back at Thomas Richardson, who continued standing at his post with tea stains visible on his uniform. The guard's expression remained completely neutral, giving no indication of his thoughts about the situation. Can I at least apologize to him properly? Marcus asked. The guard is on duty and cannot engage in conversation with civilians, Sergeant Williams explained. You can include your apology in your formal statement. As Marcus was led away from the fence area, other tourists continued to debate what they had witnessed. Social media posts about the incident began appearing within minutes, with dramatically different descriptions depending on the poster's interpretation of events. Some posts described an American tourist attacking a royal guard with hot tea, while others mentioned an accident in the crowds at Buckingham Palace. The varying accounts would later contribute to the international media attention the story received. Thomas Richardson remained at his post for another 20 minutes before being relieved by the next guard. Only then was he able to assess the extent of the tea damage to his uniform and receive medical attention for any potential burns. In the palace security office, Marcus provided his detailed account of the events to Sergeant Williams and another officer. He explained his photography trip, his previous positive experiences at the palace, and the specific crowd conditions that led to the accident. I have nothing but respect for your guards, Marcus emphasized. I've been photographing them all week because I'm so impressed by their professionalism. The last thing I would ever want to do is hurt or disrespect one of them. The officers reviewed Marcus's story against witness statements and security camera footage of the area. The video evidence was somewhat unclear due to the crowd density, but it supported the possibility that the incident had been accidental. Mr. Chun, Sergeant Williams said after completing the preliminary investigation, we're not filing charges at this time, but this matter isn't closed. The guard involved may need to provide his own statement, and additional review may be required. Marcus felt relieved but still worried about the potential consequences. What happens now? You're free to continue your visit to London, but we have your passport information and hotel details. Don't leave the country without checking with us first. Marcus left the palace security office feeling shaken and confused. His dream vacation had turned into a potential legal nightmare over a simple accident. He couldn't stop thinking about the guard's stained uniform and wondering if the young man had been hurt. That evening, Marcus sat in his hotel room researching British law regarding incidents involving royal guards. The information he found online was confusing and contradictory, ranging from claims that any interference with a guard was a serious crime to assurances that accidental incidents were handled reasonably. Marcus tried to focus on the positive aspects of his trip, but the day's events dominated his thoughts. He had planned to visit the British Museum the next day, but now he wasn't sure if he should continue sightseeing or if he should contact a lawyer. Meanwhile, Thomas Richardson was in his barracks, changing out of his tea-stained uniform. His fellow guards were curious about what had happened, as incidents involving civilians were rare and usually noteworthy. American tourist, Thomas explained simply. Spilled his drink in the crowd. Probably an accident, but you know how these things go. Thomas had mixed feelings about the incident. He believed it had been accidental based on the crowd conditions he had observed, but he also recognized that protocol required a thorough investigation. His job was to report facts, not make judgments about tourist intentions. The next morning brought unexpected developments for both Marcus and Thomas. The incident had gained traction on social media overnight, and several news outlets were beginning to pick up the story. What had started as a simple accident was about to become an international incident that would change both their lives in ways neither could have imagined. Marcus woke up the next morning to his phone buzzing constantly with notifications. Still groggy from a restless night of worry about the previous day's incident, he picked up his phone expecting to see messages from friends back home asking about his London trip. Instead, he found his social media accounts flooded with comments, mentions, and messages from complete strangers. Someone had recorded video of the tea incident and posted it online. The footage was grainy and taken from a distance, making it difficult to see the exact sequence of events clearly. However, the video showed Marcus near the fence with a cup in his hand, followed by liquid hitting the guard, and then Marcus being led away by security. The original post had been shared thousands of times overnight with increasingly dramatic captions. American tourist attacks British Royal Guard was trending on multiple platforms. The video had been edited to focus on the moment of impact, and Marcus being escorted away, without showing the crowd conditions that led to the accident. Marcus watched the video with growing horror. From this angle, and without context, it did look like he had deliberately thrown tea at the guard. The editing removed all evidence of the crowded conditions and the accidental nature of the spill. Comments on the video range from outraged calls for Marcus to be prosecuted to demands that he be banned from the UK permanently. Many commenters expressed their anger at what they perceived as disrespectful behavior towards someone serving their country. Marcus tried to respond to some of the posts, explaining that it had been an accident, but his comments were quickly buried under hundreds of angry responses. Several news websites had already picked up the story, using headlines like "Tourist Tea Attack on Royal Guard Sparks Outrage." Marcus realized he needed help dealing with this situation. He called the American Embassy in London, explaining his circumstances to a consular officer named Sarah Martinez. "Mr. Chun, I've actually already heard about this incident," Sarah said. "It's been reported to us as a potential issue involving an American citizen. Can you tell me your version of what happened?" Marcus explained the entire sequence of events, emphasizing the accidental nature of the spill and the crowd conditions that caused it. Sarah listened carefully, taking notes throughout his account. "Have you been formally charged with anything?" Sarah asked. "No, but the police said not to leave the country without checking with them first. I'm supposed to be flying home in 3 days. I'll contact the appropriate authorities to get an update on your status. In the meantime, I strongly advise you not to make any public statements about this incident. The media attention is making this more complicated than it needs to be." After ending the call with the embassy, Marcus decided to stay in his hotel room rather than continue his planned sightseeing. He was afraid of being recognized and confronted by angry tourists or locals who had seen the viral video. Meanwhile, Thomas Richardson was dealing with his own unexpected consequences from the incident. His commanding officer, Major Patricia Davies, had called him for a meeting about the situation and its growing media attention. "Richardson, this incident is becoming a public relations issue for the regiment," Major Davies explained. "The video has gone viral, and we're receiving inquiries from media outlets around the world." Thomas had seen the video and was disturbed by how it portrayed the situation. "Ma'am, I believe it was an accidental spill. The crowd conditions were quite dense, and the tourist appeared genuinely distressed about what happened. Your assessment may be correct, but public perception is becoming a problem. Some people are using this as an opportunity to criticize security around the palace, while others are demanding harsh punishment for the tourist." Major Davies explained that Thomas would need to provide a formal written statement about the incident for use in any potential legal proceedings. He would also need to be available for interviews with investigating officers. "I want you to be completely honest about what you observed," Major Davies instructed. "Don't let media pressure or public opinion influence your account. Just report the facts as you experience them." Thomas spent the morning writing his statement, carefully describing the crowd conditions, the sequence of events leading to the spill, and his assessment of whether it appeared intentional or accidental. His military training had taught him to observe situations objectively and report facts without speculation. In his statement, Thomas noted that Marcus had called out an apology immediately after the incident and appeared genuinely distressed. He also documented the crowd density and the various factors that could have contributed to an accidental spill. While Thomas was writing his statement, Marcus was receiving a call from Sergeant Williams asking him to return to the palace for additional questioning. The media attention had prompted a more thorough investigation of the incident. "Mr. Chun, we need to go through your account of events once more, and we'd like you to view some additional video footage we've obtained," Sergeant Williams explained. Marcus met with investigators at the palace security office, where they showed him security camera footage from multiple angles. The additional footage provided better context for the crowd conditions and the sequence of events leading to the spill. "This footage supports your account that you were jostled by other tourists," Detective Inspector Collins told Marcus. "However, we still need to complete a full investigation given the public attention this incident has received." Detective Inspector Collins was a veteran investigator who specialized in incidents involving tourists at major London landmarks. She had handled everything from minor accidents to serious security threats, and she prided herself on maintaining objectivity regardless of media pressure. "The guard involved has provided his own statement," she continued. "His account is consistent with yours regarding the crowd conditions and the apparent accidental nature of the spill." Marcus felt a wave of relief hearing that Thomas Richardson supported his version of events. "Does that mean the charges will be dropped?" "There were never any formal charges filed, Mr. Chun. This has been an investigation to determine whether charges were appropriate. Based on the evidence we've gathered, we're classifying this as an accidental incident with no criminal intent. Marcus couldn't believe what he was hearing. So I'm free to go home as planned. Yes, but I want to give you some advice about dealing with the media attention this has generated. The video that went viral doesn't show the full context, and public opinion has been quite negative toward you. Detective Inspector Collins explained that while Marcus was legally cleared, the court of public opinion was much less forgiving. The edited video had created a narrative that was difficult to counter, even with the complete evidence showing it was an accident. We'll be releasing a statement clarifying that this was an accidental incident, and no charges are being filed, she said. However, the damage to your reputation may be harder to repair. Marcus thanked the detective and left the palace feeling legally relieved but emotionally drained. The past 24 hours had been the most stressful of his life, and he still faced the challenge of dealing with the negative publicity. That afternoon, the Metropolitan Police released an official statement. Following a thorough investigation including witness interviews, security footage review, and statements from all parties involved, the incident at Buckingham Palace on July 17th has been determined to be accidental. No charges will be filed, and the matter is considered closed. However, the police statement received far less social media attention than the original viral video. Many people had already formed their opinions based on the misleading footage and weren't interested in updates that contradicted their initial impressions. Thomas Richardson was relieved to learn that his assessment of the incident had been vindicated by the official investigation. He hoped the controversy would die down quickly so he could return to his normal duties without media scrutiny. Marcus decided to cut his vacation short by one day to avoid any additional publicity or confrontations. He spent his remaining time in London quietly, avoiding tourist areas where he might be recognized from the viral video. The American Embassy helped Marcus navigate his early departure, ensuring he had all necessary documentation and wouldn't face any issues at airport security. Sarah Martinez had continued monitoring the situation and was pleased with the official resolution. "Mr. Chun, I know this has been a difficult experience," she said during their final phone call. "The important thing is that the investigation was fair and reached the correct conclusion. Try not to let the negative publicity overshadow what should have been a positive experience." As Marcus packed his belongings in his hotel room, he reflected on how quickly his dream vacation had turned into a nightmare. The photos he had taken of Thomas Richardson and the other guards were still on his camera, representing the positive interactions he had intended to have with British culture. Marcus realized that despite everything that had happened, he still felt respect and admiration for Thomas Richardson's professionalism. The guard had maintained his composure during the incident, provided an honest statement to investigators, and never sought to blame Marcus for what was clearly an accident. On his last evening in London, Marcus wrote a letter to Major Davies, asking her to pass along his apologies to Thomas Richardson. In the letter, he expressed his regret about the incident and his admiration for the way the guard had handled the situation. "I hope Guardsman Richardson understands that I have nothing but respect for his service and professionalism," Marcus wrote. "What happened was an accident that I regret deeply, but I'm grateful that he was fair and honest in his account of events." The next morning, as Marcus headed to Heathrow Airport, he saw news reports about the incident on airport television monitors. Most outlets were now reporting the official conclusion that it had been an accident, though some commentators continued to debate tourist behavior around cultural landmarks. Thomas Richardson received Marcus's letter through his commanding officer. He appreciated the tourist's thoughtfulness in reaching out, though he considered the incident closed and didn't require an apology for what he had always believed was an accident. As Marcus's plane took off from London, he looked down at the city that had given him such a complex mix of experiences. Despite everything that had happened, he found himself hoping to return someday under better circumstances. Thomas Richardson returned to his normal duties, though he noticed increased attention from tourists who recognized him from the viral video. Most interactions were positive, with people expressing support for his professionalism during the incident. Both young men had learned unexpected lessons about how quickly modern media could transform a simple accident into an international incident, and how important it was to seek truth rather than accept initial impressions. Their brief, dramatic encounter had taught them both about resilience, fairness, and the complexity of human judgment in the digital age. 6 months after the incident, Marcus Chun was sitting in his San Francisco apartment, still dealing with the long-term consequences of those few seconds outside Buckingham Palace. The viral video had permanently changed his life in ways he never could have anticipated. Despite the official police statement clearing him of any wrongdoing, the internet had a long memory for dramatic stories. Marcus had returned to his job as a software engineer, but colleagues and clients occasionally recognized him from the news coverage. Some were sympathetic, understanding that accidents happen, while others remained skeptical about his version of events. The incident had become a cautionary tale about tourist behavior that was still being discussed in travel forums and social media groups. The tea-throwing tourist, as he had been dubbed online, found that his professional reputation had been affected. 2 potential clients had canceled meetings after recognizing him, expressing concern about being associated with someone who had been involved in such a controversial incident. Marcus had considered changing his name or moving to a different city, but his lawyer advised against any actions that might be perceived as admitting guilt. Instead, he focused on rebuilding his reputation through positive professional work and community involvement. The psychological impact had been harder to manage than the professional consequences. Marcus found himself constantly anxious about being recognized in public. He had developed a habit of avoiding crowded spaces and tourist areas, fearing another accidental incident that might be misinterpreted. Marcus had started seeing a therapist, Dr. Elizabeth Warren, who specialized in helping people deal with sudden public notoriety and its psychological effects. Through their sessions, Marcus was learning to process the trauma of being globally vilified for an accident he couldn't prevent. "You've become a symbol for something larger than yourself," Dr. Warren explained during one of their sessions. People aren't really angry at Marcus Chin the person. They're angry at the idea of disrespectful tourists, and you became the face of that frustration. Marcus had tried to tell his story through interviews with sympathetic journalists, but most media outlets were more interested in the controversy than in the truth. A few travel bloggers had written thoughtful pieces about the incident, examining how social media can distort reality, but these received far less attention than the original viral video. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, Thomas Richardson was experiencing his own unexpected aftermath from the incident. The young guard had become something of a celebrity within military circles and among supporters of the monarchy. His professional handling of the situation had been praised by his superiors and cited as an example of proper military bearing under unusual circumstances. Thomas had been promoted to Lance Corporal, partly in recognition of his exemplary conduct during the tea incident and the media scrutiny that followed. His commanding officers valued how he had maintained his professionalism while providing honest, factual accounts to investigators. However, Thomas also faced challenges from his newfound notoriety. Tourism around Buckingham Palace had increased specifically to see the guard from the video. Many visitors tried to provoke reactions from him, hoping to recreate the viral moment or test his legendary composure. Thomas had been moved to different posts around the palace complex to reduce the focused attention, but dedicated tourists often tracked down his location. Some visitors were respectful and simply wanted to show their support for his professionalism, while others treated him like a tourist attraction rather than a working soldier. The incident had also affected Thomas's personal life. He had been dating a young teacher named Emma Watson, not the actress, for several months before the tea incident. The sudden media attention and public interest in his life had put strain on their relationship. "I feel like I'm dating a celebrity," Emma had told him during one of their last conversations. "Everywhere we go, people recognize you and want to talk about that video. It's not the quiet life I was looking for." Thomas understood Emma's concerns, but felt frustrated that an accident he hadn't caused was affecting his personal relationships. He had never sought attention or fame, and the constant public interest in his life was exhausting. Thomas had also received unexpected correspondence from around the world. Letters and emails poured in from military families, monarchy supporters, and people who admired his professionalism. Most messages were positive and encouraging, but the volume was overwhelming for someone who preferred privacy. A particularly meaningful letter came from a retired Royal Marine named James Thompson, who had served in the Falklands War. "Your conduct during that incident reminded me why I was proud to serve," Thompson wrote. "In my day, we faced different challenges, but the principles of duty and professionalism remain the same." Thomas treasured these supportive messages from fellow service members and veterans, but he struggled with the broader public attention that came with them. He had joined the Guards to serve his country with dignity, not to become a social media phenomenon. The incident had also prompted discussions within the military about how to handle viral incidents involving service personnel. Thomas's commanding officers developed new protocols for dealing with media attention and social media coverage of military personnel, using his experience as a case study. Both Marcus and Thomas had been contacted by documentary filmmakers and book publishers interested in telling their story, but both had declined these opportunities. Neither young man wanted to profit from or further publicize what they considered a simple accident that had been blown out of proportion. Marcus had started a small blog where he wrote about travel photography and cultural respect, hoping to promote more thoughtful tourism practices. He never directly addressed the Buckingham Palace incident, but his writing reflected lessons learned about the importance of cultural sensitivity and situational awareness while traveling. One of his blog posts, titled "The Responsibility of Tourist Photography," discussed the ethical considerations of photographing people in their work environments. Though he didn't mention the tea incident, readers who knew his story understood the personal experience behind his insights. Thomas had quietly donated most of the money he received from well-wishers to military charities supporting veterans and active duty families. He felt uncomfortable keeping donations that came as a result of media attention he had never sought. A year after the incident, Marcus made an unexpected decision. He had saved enough money to return to London, and he wanted to properly apologize to Thomas Richardson in person. Marcus had been working with Dr. Warren on this plan for months, seeing it as an important step in his healing process. Marcus contacted the American Embassy in London, explaining his desire to make a personal apology to the Guard. Sarah Martinez, the consular officer who had helped him during the original incident, was still in her position and remembered his case well. "Mr. Chun, while I admire your desire to make things right, approaching a royal guard while he's on duty would not be appropriate," she advised. "However, I might be able to help you arrange something through proper military channels." Sarah contacted Major Davies, who was now Lieutenant Colonel Davies after her own recent promotion. Davies remembered both the incident and Marcus's thoughtful letter from a year earlier. She was intrigued by his request to apologize in person. "It's highly unusual," Davies told Sarah during their phone conversation, "but it might provide closure for both parties. Let me speak with Richardson and see if he's interested in meeting." Thomas was surprised by the request, but curious about what Marcus wanted to say. He had always believed the incident was accidental and held no ill will toward the American tourist. After discussing it with his fellow guards and superiors, Thomas agreed to a brief, private meeting. The meeting was arranged at a neutral location away from Buckingham Palace. Marcus flew to London on a cold February morning, exactly 18 months after the original incident. He was nervous about seeing Thomas again, unsure how the guard would react to his presence. They met at a quiet coffee shop in Kensington, with Sarah Martinez and Lieutenant Colonel Davies present to ensure the meeting remained appropriate and comfortable for both parties. Thomas arrived in civilian clothes, looking younger and more relaxed than Marcus remembered from their original encounter. "Mr. Chun," Thomas said, extending his hand. "I appreciate you coming all this way." Marcus shook hands with the young soldier, immediately struck by Thomas's genuine friendliness. "Guardsman Richardson, I wanted to apologize properly for what happened. I know it was an accident, but I felt terrible about it for over a year. Please call me Thomas. And honestly, I never blamed you for what happened. I saw how crowded it was that day, and I could tell you were genuinely sorry about the spill." They spent an hour talking about their respective experiences since the incident. Marcus learned about Thomas's promotion and the challenges of dealing with increased tourist attention. Thomas heard about Marcus's struggles with unwanted notoriety and the impact on his personal and professional life. "The strangest thing," Thomas said, "is how different people saw completely different things in that same video. Some people thought you were attacking me, while others saw an obvious accident. It made me think about how our perspectives shape what we believe we're seeing." Marcus nodded enthusiastically. "That's exactly what I've been thinking about." The same event became completely different stories depending on who was telling it. As their conversation continued, both young men realized they had more in common than they initially thought. Both had been thrust into unwanted public attention through no fault of their own. Both had been forced to mature quickly under intense scrutiny. Both had learned hard lessons about the power of social media to distort reality. "You know," Thomas said as their meeting was ending, "I've been thinking about writing something about this whole experience. Not for fame or money, but to help people understand how quickly things can spiral out of control online." Marcus was excited by this idea. "I've been writing too, actually. Nothing about the incident directly, but about travel and cultural respect. Maybe we could work together on something." Lieutenant Colonel Davies and Sarah Martinez exchanged surprised looks. What had started as a simple apology meeting was turning into something much more positive and constructive. Over the following months, Marcus and Thomas collaborated on a series of articles about their shared experience. They wrote about the importance of seeking truth rather than accepting initial impressions, the responsibility that comes with sharing content online, and the human cost of viral outrage. Their articles were published in various magazines and websites focusing on travel, military life, and digital culture. The response was overwhelmingly positive, with many readers expressing appreciation for their balanced and thoughtful approach to such a controversial topic. Marcus and Thomas became unlikely friends, staying in touch through video calls and messages. Marcus eventually returned to London for a proper vacation, this time without any incidents. Thomas showed him around the city from a local's perspective, introducing him to places most tourists never see. 2 years after their first meeting, Marcus and Thomas co-authored a book titled The Tea Incident, a story of misunderstanding, media, and redemption. The book became a bestseller, particularly among people interested in how social media shapes public perception and the importance of seeking truth in an age of instant information. Both authors donated a portion of their book profits to organizations promoting cross-cultural understanding and responsible tourism. They also established a small scholarship fund for military families and international students studying conflict resolution. Marcus had finally found a way to turn his worst travel experience into something positive and meaningful. Thomas had discovered a talent for writing and communication that would eventually lead to opportunities beyond his military service. Their story became a case study in business schools and journalism programs about the power of social media, the importance of thorough investigation, and the possibility of redemption through honest dialogue and mutual understanding. 5 years after the tea incident, Marcus returned to Buckingham Palace as part of a cultural exchange program he had helped establish between American and British universities. Standing at the fence where everything had started, he reflected on how profoundly his life had changed from a simple accident. Thomas Richardson, now promoted to sergeant, occasionally worked ceremonial duties at the palace while pursuing his degree in international relations during off-duty hours. When their paths crossed during Marcus's official visit, they greeted each other as old friends rather than former adversaries. The viral video still existed online, but it had been largely overshadowed by their book and articles explaining the true story. Most importantly, both young men had learned that even the worst experiences could become opportunities for growth, understanding, and positive change if approached with honesty, courage, and mutual respect. Their friendship stood as proof that even in an age of instant judgment and viral outrage, truth and human decency could ultimately prevail over misunderstanding and prejudice.